Guys, welcome back to Coliseum Forum. I know I say this a lot. Today, I actually mean it. I am a huge, huge fan of our guest. We have Kelly Sue DeConnick. You may know her from Pretty Deadly, Bitch Planet, Captain Marvel. I could keep going on. Her recent Eisner Award-winning Wonder Woman Historia. Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat with you.
So the thing we're here to talk about today is your new creator-owned comic coming out from Dark Horse later this year, FML.
Yep.
Uh, super, super excited. I got to read it. Another really cool function of my job. I get to read comics early.
Yay.
Uh, are you okay?
That is a fair question, and probably no.
So
It does read a little bit like a cry for help, doesn't it?
there is, and maybe it's just me projecting into the comic, which I think, if that happens in art, that's great, and maybe it's part of the point of art. But there feels like there's like a lot of anxiety going on in there.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of what. Oh, hello. Hi, excuse me. That's my dog deciding that she needs to be in here too. Stella? Sorry. Stella's a little velociraptor and has learned how to open doors. So my apologies. Um, yeah, it's I mean the every book, even when you're writing about superpowered characters, if you're writing a truth, you're writing about something you that is deeply true to you, something that is what you're experiencing. I would also say that even when you write historical things, you're not writing about then you're in some way writing about now, because it's the only thing that matters, right?
Right.
And um and so all of my books are very personal in one way or another, but this one's probably the most literally personal. Um this one is the one where it's really easy to track, like, oh, what characters are inspired by whom, you know.
Right. Right.
Um and there are specific real details from our lives in the book. And that has led to a lot of interesting conversations in the house too. And as a parent, interesting conversations with my teenagers, both as my kids, as children, and as young writers, uh, having the opportunity to talk to them as a writer about what are our responsibilities to people when we base characters on them.
That was
So
actually going to be my next question. Do you kind of run things by them beforehand, or is it sort of after the fact, like, hey, you remember that thing you did last year in 10th grade? That's in the book. Is that cool? Like, how does that work?
they read everything, and they have veto power.
Okay.
So, and I don't, so I wouldn't, when you base a character, there's two things here. One, when you base a character on a living person, it's not that living person. That's a starting place, and the
Sure.
character takes on a life of their own and a personality of their own. And that was a very important thing for them to understand. And also, when you base a character on a living person who's an adult, I personally don't believe you owe that adult anything save for, whatever you owe them as a human being. If they've told you something in
Right.
confidence, you shouldn't put that in the book,
Right. Right.
or
Right.
you should be able to make sure that they're not recognizable, or, really base level stuff, but you don't owe them veto power. Um, uh, like, don't be an asshole, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
The kids, though, it's different. Like, they're children, and it's I don't I don't ever want to embarrass them or exploit them or make them feel bad, and so we've had
Parent is so weird.
conversations about how the the characters are inspired by them. I've made no secret of that, but they're different people. Well, and for one thing, if I was really writing them as my children, I couldn't put them in danger, you know?
Right. Right. Right.
And
Right.
it's a comic book. I have to be able to put them in danger, and I wouldn't be
Right.
able to do that with my kids. So,
like I was saying, I think being a parent's weird to begin with because it's like no matter what you do. I mean, I'm not a comic book writer, but like even when I'm talking about my son, I have three little boys. I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 6-month-old, right?
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, so I'm pretty new at this dad thing. My producer, who you met at the beginning of the show, he also has three little ones, right around the same age as. But it's always a characterization, right? So I have this idea of like who my oldest son Abe is, right? Like he's this
Yeah.
little engineer boy, and then Leo, my middle son, he's like this little entertainer, and then the baby, we're still obviously figuring him out, but that's still my characterization of them. He may have his own idea of who he is, period, right? Because they're still kids, they're still figuring it out.
Right.
Um,
And this is not like Harry Potter is not real. You can't put a hat on an
right,
8-year-old and know anything about who they're going to be, right?
exactly. Yeah,
Like
exactly.
there may be some things about who they are in their tinydom that
Right,
follow them into adulthood, but maybe not.
right,
And we don't want to decide that about them. We won't know that until retrospect.
right. Well,
Yeah, so that's tough.
I think I told you before the interview started. I've read the first two issues, and obviously, since the book doesn't come out for a little bit, we have to be very careful about not spoiling things. But going back to the anxiety of the book, there's a page, and I read them out of order, like I told you, which is also embarrassing. But oh, there's this. It's a page. It's three panels, and then I guess the rest of the page as well. That really, as a parent, and especially a middle-aged parent today,
Mhm.
it's. I mean, you wrote out this speech that I've had in my head for years. That like there are just some days that those panels, that speech,
The
that she's
scary things.
yeah, and like or like you just want to apologize, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes like I will be doing so, I'll read something in the news and I just want to go find them and give them a hug and just be like, hey, sorry guys, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So it's really like that's what I mean. There's just a lot of anxiety in this book, but in a good way. I think this is a way, and again, this could just be me projecting my own anxieties into this book, but it there's just a lot going on in a way that, and I'll be honest with you, I read a ton of comics that I haven't seen in comics in a while, and I'm really, really excited for this book. I'm really excited for people to see it. It's not a
Thank
question.
you.
It's just a
Thank you. No,
compliment.
I'm okay. So a few things. One, you told me beforehand that you read them out of order, and I told you that my husband actually said maybe your second issue is your first issue,
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, you might be right, but at that point, I was like, that is too much work.
that's fair.
I cannot go through, and I couldn't, it to my mind, I couldn't just flip them.
Right,
Because the actions, even though they are consecutive, even though they do switch POV.
right.
And so I was like, I don't know how I would do that. And so I didn't. But I didn't think he was entirely wrong, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you read them out of order and it worked. So
It, it's a little bit more esoteric, right? And it's a little bit
yeah,
more. I don't want to say ham-fisted that way, like you're like with like the metaphors for things, but it works so well. Like it's a different experience,
yeah,
but tells the same story.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting.
So if
Uh,
you're watching this and you own issues 1 and 2 and you've read them, go back and read issue 2 first and pretend it's issue 1, and then read issue 1, and you're going to have a totally different experience, which is one of the cool things about comics.
yeah, and yeah, that you get. We talk about that about comics all the time, right? That the reader's agency is so much a part of comics. We can guide and suggest, but we don't demand the way television or film does. We don't set the pace. We suggest the pace. So you can go back and you can read flipping back and forth, and that's kind of expected and part of the practice.
Right,
Uh, so whereas, I mean, I suppose you could be rewinding with a remote as you're watching, but that's not the experience that's expected.
right, right, right,
So, yeah, and then I guess the other thing is, so I don't have an elevator pitch for this book, right? So we kind of just launched into the conversation, and which is great. That's kind of those are the comics that I like the most are the ones that just drop you in the world and you figure it out, right?
Right.
Um, but I do need to figure out how to answer the what's it about. Um, and I'll tell you, my daughter came up with a really great line about the book, although it doesn't reveal any of the plot whatsoever. So I'm not sure it's what I'm searching for yet. But she said it's a very funny book about some not funny things, um, which I really loved because Brian Bendis, lives right up the street, and our families are good friends. And Brian said to me, like, you have to be careful about how you talk about the book because it's a really fun book and you make it sound like a bummer. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
That it's first of all, I'm gonna embarrass myself again the same way I did when I talked to Matt Fraction, and I was like, wait, you live in Kelly Sue DeConnick's house. That's a true story, anybody watching this.
Yeah.
I actually got back into comics and love comics because of Brian Michael Bendis. When his career took off in like the early 2000s, I had just kind of gotten to high school, too cool for school at that point, can't read comics. My buddies are telling me like, no, you really have to read the stuff Brian Michael Bendis is doing. I started reading it, and then it's Brian K. Vaughan, and then all those guys start
Yeah.
popping up. And then it's like, oh yeah, comics comes into this new renaissance, and then all of you start coming around, and it's like, wow, comics are amazing, and this is what I want to do forever and ever and ever. And here we are now. I'm talking to you about this amazing new comic that comes out in November, right?
Yeah, it's November 6th, the day after the election, because
Ooh.
I am a marketing genius. Um, but yeah, no, Brian really changed dialogue in modern comics.
Yeah,
Like, he broke all kinds of rules and brought a very naturalistic dialogue style to mainstream comics that hadn't. And I'm not suggesting before anyone asks me, like, yes, he's not the only person who's ever written naturalistic dialogue, but he brought naturalistic dialogue, a very specific kind of naturalistic dialogue, to mainstream comics in a huge way that was enormously influential and got a lot of us over a hump.
I
Uh,
agree.
so yeah, no, I remain a big fan. Um,
This is now Brian Michael Bendis appreciation interview.
sure, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, we're both fans. So I mean,
yeah.
I don't have the sweater. You have the sweater.
I do have the sweater. I made a sweater of his face, which mortified him, and I love that.
Your daughter said, very funny book about some not funny things. My notes, again, I read them out of order.
Right, right,
Loss of identity when you're a parent, unless I missed something, you don't even learn the main character's name until the second issue.
right.
Uh, and so, going on, I think there's a lot going on in this book, and it's not just the anxiety like we talked about at the beginning of the interview. I mean, there's all these overarching themes. There's existential dread about being, at least from my perspective, about being an adult, about being a parent, about being a person in general.
Hmm.
Obviously there's some commentary on what's going on in the world, as it is now. And then obviously recontextualizing them when you read them in the order that you expect people to read them in. You're dealing with like teenage angst and being a kid in the modern contemporary world, right?
Right.
So that there's these I mean, there's so much going on in this book. There's all kinds of things going on. Plus, there's like this cool punk rock, like witchy aesthetic that I think everybody could get behind. And I think, if you just like cool things, you'll dig this book. If you really, really want to get into it and have like really cool comics conversations with your friends, FML is probably the book. If you just want to see some cool, because I mean, the book looks amazing as well. Shout out David, right?
Yeah. Let's do the
Yeah, let's
David
do that.
Lopez
Yeah,
appreciation here. Okay, so the book, and this is interesting because you said main character, and because you read the second one first, to you the main
right,
character is Patty, right?
right.
Um, so
But she's also the most relatable because again, middle-aged parent dealing
that's
with
true.
kids.
That's true,
Right.
right? And So there are kind of two protagonists, although my intention was that Riley was the main protagonist and Mom is kind of the secondary. And she's called Mom more than she's called Patty, and which, when you read them in reverse, is why you didn't learn her name. And in fact, it's a deliberate choice to have her called Riley's mom in the third person. People refer to her,
Does that
or
happen to
in
you in real
second
life?
person, people refer to her as, well, Riley's mom, you know.
Does that happen to you in real life? Because I'm Abe and Leo's dad,
Yeah.
like all the time. Like and very quickly that happened. Like you went from having this identity as like I've got hand tattoos. Do you know how cool I used to be? And now I'm just Abe and Leo's dad.
Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah. And it's, I mean, and I think it's a trip too, like, because we're proud of it, right? It's not
Right.
a like
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm happy to be mom. Mom is
There's
an honor.
nothing I'm more proud of for sure.
Right. Yeah. But also there is absolutely some kind of a shift that happens. And so shit, I forgot what I like completely lost my train of thought because that I went down that spiral because it's really interesting.
I think we started to get excited about David and his amazing.
David. Yes. Okay. So
Is it David? Did I say it wrong? Have I been saying it wrong forever?
it is David. He's Spanish. But also when I first called him David, he went, "Ooh, David." So, but like, my dude, that's your name, is it
Right,
not?
right,
Uh,
right, right.
but yes, he's fantastic, and I love him dearly. But what he does in this book is like next level. So we, so it's a story about Riley and Riley's mom trying to navigate anxiety and guilt and the world in 2024, right?
Right.
And he's a 17-year-old um, metal kid who kind of draws through his anxiety in his notebook. He just draws in pencil on lined paper, like all kinds of like, metal illustrations and stuff. And his mom is a former Pacific Northwest grunge punk, who had a zine in the 90s, and from her thought, she was a musician, but she had this zine and ends up like the music kind of falls away and
Right.
she ends up becoming like a newspaper cartoonist. And that's what she does for her job. So
Right.
she draws. So there are there are actually four, but we'll talk about three. There are three different distinct art styles in the book. And they're all David. But David had the challenge of making an art style for Riley, an art style for Patty, and a kind of objective-ish third art style that is like, David's voice.
Right.
That's the main story of the book. And Patty's and Riley's are kind of superimposed on the book. So they had to be distinct enough to really read as different, but they had to be sympathetic enough that it isn't jarring for them to all be together. And then the fourth style is he's also done a style for Patty's zine work. So
Right.
it's more, so you see that a couple times. But that one's not one of the three main ones. And then we also do this thing where, because each of the two characters is telling, they address the reader and tell the story subjectively, but having two narrators interact, we borrowed something from manga where we actually in the script I refer to them as Chibi Riley and Chibi Mom, but they don't look like Chibi. So in manga, you'll have these characters that are called Chibi versions of the regular characters, and those they're sort of squished. They look like Funko Pops. They have like big
They're little
heads,
super
little
deformed
tiny,
versions. Yep.
yeah, big heads, little tiny bodies, look like Funko Pops, and they can address the reader. They can break the fourth wall. They can comment on the action. They're usually like really heightened. And so we do that, but they don't look like chibi. They when we do that, they look like those, when Riley does it, it's how he draws on paper, and when
Right.
Mom does it, it's in her very like underground cartoonist style.
Right. Right. Right.
So
So
hers are in black and white, and her and his are like pencil on blue lined paper.
yeah, which is, I mean, as an artist, I'm not an artist. I can't draw stick figures, but as somebody that loves comics, reads comics, doing three different and like you said, four different art styles in one book, that's absolutely crazy. And he does it well. Obviously, we're talking about this book, 2 months before it's out on the stands for everybody to read. But the book feels alive. Like it feels like you're reading a cartoon. Like it feels very animated. And
Yeah.
I hope that's what you guys were going for because that's what comes across on the page.
Well, so David's art style, and this was an interesting thing. So he and I worked together on Captain Marvel for a long time.
Oh, you spoiled it. That was my next question.
Yeah. So we worked together for on Captain Marvel for God, I don't know how many issues. And his so I always say that I can write to anybody's style. I have to kind of fall in love with their mind. I have to enjoy them as a person. And then
Right,
I'll make the work for them, but I need to know them. I need to like them. I can't write a generic script.
right,
And I'm trying to write to their strengths. I'm trying to make them laugh. I'm trying, it's a comic script is a very personal thing. It's like a letter. And with because David, so a lot of artists draw their own face. So when you see a character and then you meet the artist, you're like, oh, well, that's because that's the reference you have available to you all the time, right?
right, right,
So
right,
all the characters kind of a little bit look like you. Which I mean, you could make the argument that the writer does that too, but that's another conversation. Um, but David's characters, they don't, it's not his face. He has a distinct style. Like there is,
right.
I can tell his faces from other people's faces, but it's not his face, but it's his energy. So David is at 11,
Is that how he is as a person?
as a person. David and Andrea Muti, the Italian artist, Andrea
Yeah.
Muti like writes in all caps and like I think like lives on espresso. I mean, both of them are big feelings, big laughs, and David will be like, I'm an asshole. I'm like, David, you're not an asshole. You have big feelings, um, and so they're like really, and so with Captain Marvel, I always felt like I was chasing him. Like I couldn't write big enough to match his style. And the funny thing is, I get the our last issue together, which is the issue when um Tracy has died. And it's the goodbye to Tracy. It was my last issue on Captain Marvel. It was a very emotional book. I just gave up. And I was like, I can't match his energy. I'm just gonna pull back and I'm gonna write this quiet story with a sense of humor that W has a real sense of humor in his line. Just the best that I can. It's our strongest issue, easily. It's easily our strongest issue. And it was like, well, shit. Like I was going about it wrong.
Right,
And like that's a hell of a thing to learn on your last issue together.
right,
And so when we came into this collaboration, I took a sort of different approach where I wasn't trying to, well, at first I was trying to write a little bit to his style, but we had two false starts with two different versions of what this book is. Um, but I wasn't trying to match his energy. I was trying to like he loves D&D and fantasy stuff, and so I was sort of trying to write more of that, but I was faking it, and like you could tell because that's not my shit. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I'm sorry. Um, but when then David was like, what I want to write is something true and something that matters. So or what I want to make, is something true and something that matters. So you write what feels true and matters to you, and I'll be excited about it. And and he very much has been. And he's incredible. And like he came here and brought his family and did research in Portland and took 18 tons of reference and yeah, and it's just he's been absolutely the best partner on this book that I could imagine. And I'm incredibly fortunate because I'm kind of picky about who I work with. The people that have been my long-term collaborators are people who have become like family that I love very dearly. And David is now that's a new one, as another big extended family.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And just as from the fanboy perspective, like there are writers that you'll love, but then they work with like they collaborate with an artist that you're like, oh, this is lame. I would say all of your projects, everything I've ever picked up from you, the art matches the voice of the story. Because if it doesn't, it doesn't work, right? And so
Yeah.
that is definitely I don't know how you pick who you collaborate with, but that is definitely in your career, from my perspective as a fan, the voice and the art have always matched very, very well.
Yeah, I think it's because I'm less about their style, their art style, and more about their brain style, if that makes sense. Um, so like I kind of fall in love with the artist in a way,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and so I'm writing for them. I want to make like what's the best David Lopez book,
Right, right,
that.
yeah. And obviously, both of you will go on and have continued success and amazing careers. I hope. I mean, I'm going to keep buying your comics, but uh, to date, if you asked me, like, yeah, this I think you guys have nailed it, at least for the first two issues. I mean, it could go off the cliff at issue 3, right? Uh, but if I am so stoked about this book, um, I, if you are watching this before the book comes out and you want some more information, there's a really really great Hollywood Reporter article that just came out recently, and I actually wanted to touch on that and ask a couple questions. That you guys have been working on this since 2019. This book,
Um, yeah, that's probably right. I mean, we first talked about the first time we had a conversation about it was when we were at dinner in LA before the release of the Captain Marvel movie.
right?
And David was like, we should do something creator owned. And I was like, yes, we should. And I mean, I think I had like a lot on my plate. I always have a lot on my plate because I'm really, it's not like I'm bad at saying no. Like I want to say no, but I can't make myself. Like I'm afraid of hurting somebody's feelings. It's more that like I want to do all of the things, and
Right.
then I sort of think I can do all of the things at all the same time, and I can't. And I'm a really slow writer, and I really can't. But yeah, it's a character weakness, I think. Uh, but I didn't have at the time. I didn't have like the David idea, you know.
Right.
And he kind of just kept at me, and every now and then, he would be like, "What about this? What about this?" Or send me something, and at one point, he was like, like a magic thing, like a magic school thing or something. I can't remember. He said magic school. He said I think he had magic something, and I was fussing to Matt, and I was like, I don't want to. I'm not interested in writing Hogwarts. And
Right.
Matt was like, well, if Hogwarts is the Eton of the magic world, you could write the DeVry of the magic world. And I was like, oh, that's so good. And so I messed around with that for a little while. I pitched that to David. And we had some characters that had like stupid powers,
Right.
or like they had a specialty in magic that was like, don't know how that's useful.
Right. 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 Okay.
Um,
I would
and
read that book, by the way. That's an amazing pitch. I'm sold.
um, but it didn't quite click. And then and that was called the first title was Useless, was our that was the working title for that. And then somehow, and I don't remember how, I think it might have been a dream that evolved into something with this kid who was like proto Riley. And I re it, the original idea I remember was like he wakes up in like his room has flooded, and like we find out his mom is dead, and his mom was a singer in a punk band. So there's proto
Right.
uh
Patricia.
mom.
Yep.
And but he's like a young adult. He's like a college student, and he lives with this older lesbian couple, and he doesn't um he doesn't know who his father was. And there's all these different characters from his mother's past that might have been his father, and he's kind of made them in his mind into a D&D party. There's five of
Okay.
them, and they are these five men that live in his head as these D&D archetypes who kind of advise him on things like these five fathers that
Okay. Another
are.
book I would read.
Yeah, I mean, like I still like the pitch. I'm like, wait, why did we let that go?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but it was because we really let it go because the D&D of it
Right.
was getting in the way of, I think, the story I really wanted to tell, which
Right.
was just about Riley's anxiety.
Right.
Um, and then and it felt artificial. It felt like this is a thing I'm putting on instead of a thing that needs to be here. So
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, and I think I said this earlier in the interview, but it's definitely bigger than just Riley's anxiety. And again, I could just be projecting on the book because as a
no,
middle-aged
you're
man,
not.
there's a lot of that in the book. Like that's why I think I opened up the first thing I asked you was, "Are you okay?" Because I'm not, and I'm dealing with a lot of the themes that are in this book right now, and that's why I think I love it so much. Is because it's
Yeah,
like this is what I wake up to every day, like this loss of identity. Like I used to think I was cool, now I'm just Abe and Leo's dad. Which again, I love that. I love that.
yeah,
Right? That's
yeah,
so cool. But it's not who I was, right? And then I'm sort of a background character to their world now, right?
yeah,
And then, on top of that, then just we also live in this insane kind of like existence. Like all of us cumulatively are in this insane world. But we also had the hubris to create life. And then it's like, right. And then it's like, hey, sorry guys, but you have to go deal with all this insanity now too, because we just wanted to see what it'd be like, what you guys would be like,
yeah.
right?
No, I mean, we have a friend, his name is Turner, who used to be our in-house editor. And I love Turner so much. He was a PSU student, with Ben Saunders. No, not PSU, Oregon State. I'm sorry. Don't tell.
Go Ducks.
But anyway, Turner Turner like has a shtick that he does that's kind of like the mopey dog like thing, and it's really funny. But at one point he said something, and he was like, I'm sorry, I'm such a pessimist. And I was like, Turner, you're having a baby. This was like before his child was born, and he was like, you're having a baby. Like that is the most optimistic thing any human being can do. So you can put on the everything is terrible pessimist hat, and it's really funny, but deep in your heart, there's some part of you that
Right.
believes our future has a chance.
It can get better because
Yeah,
otherwise, why would you do that?
you
Right.
wouldn't do it. You
Right.
wouldn't do it. You're not cruel, you know?
Right.
Um, and so for those of us that, are raising children in this moment and we're afraid for them, I think we also love life and we believe that all of this is worth it, or we wouldn't have brought them here. So I absolutely get that from a consuming perspective in like how I take in art and how I love a piece of art that is a big swing that doesn't quite land.
Right.
I'm always like those are my favorites. Like when you're reach just exceeded your grasp and it's like, oh man, like I love that. They didn't quite get there, but I love that they tried, you
Right.
know?
Right. Right.
And
The
I'll
brass
and
ring
I'll
is right
be
there.
thinking about it and work and like um so then but as a creator, I think I do have these moments like writing the abandonment of the child in Historia was exceptionally painful. It was really hard. It was literally difficult to write. I felt it in my body. It hurt. Um, and that, not necessarily that pain, but that, oh, I'm writing a truth here
Right.
is a kind of that's a thing to like that you're always looking for when you have the moment that gives you a goosebump where a goosebump, not one goosebump, no one has one goosebump, that'd be weird, like goosebumps, but
That'd be kind of cool though, right? Like if you just had
where
like look at it, look at it. It's right here. Look at it.
there it is, where you have that moment where you feel like, oh, okay, I found a thing that's real, you know.
Right.
And sometimes it doesn't happen in the writing, but when the art comes back, like there's a moment with Patty before she goes into Amy's house at the end of two, where she just puts her head on the steering wheel. I didn't feel that in the writing, but when the art came in, I was like, ugh, like, oh, okay. I know I've been there at the end of so many days.
Kelly, thank you so much for stopping by today. As I said a million times during this interview, I'm a huge fan. I'm super excited. I can't wait to get FML into the hands of our customers. It is just another awesome book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed being here. FML is out November 6th, and I hope you'll pick it up. And I hope you pick it up at Coliseum Comics.